Jesi milostivi čovekoljubi Bog i tebi slavu uznosimo, Otcu i Sinu i Svetome Duhu, sada i u vekove vekova.
In a world of shadows and secrets untold, where primeval stories make the brave go cold, mighty gods on high and realms below, whispers of legends that shape each soul. And nightmarish dreams, cryptids lurking, nothing's as it seems, giants walking, angels and demons fight, only truth can bring the light. Through the echoes of time, the tales unfold, mysteries arise as the prophecies are foretold, from valiant knights to buried treasure, this podcast brings nothing but pleasure. Welcome to Mysteries of Majesty. Study with us, don't be a travesty. Theology, mythology, fantasy and horror, Dungeons and Dragons, Skyrim and Mordor. And Mordor, powers haunt the evening, in gothic castles where they're screaming, wizards cast spells in the towers tonight, exploiting enigmas hidden from our sight. Archaeologists make excavations deep of the ancient tombs where pharaohs sleep. In the dust of ages we chronicles keep, storytelling's power of monsters that creep. Mysteries and Majesty is the place for you to learn about this haunted space. From scholarship to manuscripts of old, unlock the secrets of wisdom and gold.
Blessed Friday, everyone, and welcome to another episode on your favorite podcast. It is a perfect coincidence, yet it may be also a divine coincidence that tonight's episode is dedicated to the person whose last name ends with Kirk, and we are always going back to the tragedy that recently got our brother Charlie and his family. So please keep praying for his wife and his kids, especially because there are still vile and evil people out there wishing them harm and even death. So when it comes to tonight's podcast and tonight's episode, we'll be dealing with this 17th century, which is a Baroque or early modern period time when this Scottish minister went looking for supernatural creatures that how he described they don't have middle nature, something between man and an angel. His name was Robert Kirk, and he roamed the Highlands, where he grew up in Scotland, talking to his parishioners and other country folks about their encounters with fairies, with elves, with doppelgangers, with ghosts, and other things and other creatures that he called subterranean, invisible people, quote unquote. So he was very interested not just in theology and not just in the scriptures and the word of God. He was also interested in this whole spirit world that we are surrounded and inevitably part of. Magic was a part of everyday life for Kirk and his fellow Highlanders, and this remarkable book offers rare glimpses into their enchanted realm. And what is interesting is that even though this manuscript was written sometime in late 17th century, the volume was first published in 1815, and it's publicly available. So I may be even able to share some of the stories for tonight. So then I can read one, Shaun can read one, and we'll be commenting. And these are supposedly all the eyewitness reports from the 17th century when it comes to people in Scotland eyewitnessing different paranormal and supernatural phenomena and cryptids. Shaun, when you were checking out and researching for today's podcast for this book, what are your overall impressions? How do we imagine you're not even talking to a non-believer or an atheist. imagine you're talking to your regular churchgoer, your friend, and you're like, man, we're just talking about giants, we're just talking about the ghosts, we're just talking about these spirits, we're just talking about gods of the nations, we're just talking about creatures that can like shapeshift, appear and disappear, they can torture people. And they're like, they get frozen, they want to disrespect you, they don't believe in this. They're like, well, it's not in the Bible. For me, I think this is one of the biggest challenges for us who love learning and see all these connections and see the sources, and some of us even experience things. It's very hard to deny these things, yet we want to be also biblical and patient and gentle to our fellow churchgoers who are like, that's all nonsense, it's all fairy tales. So how would you address people who are very skeptical, yet they believe in the supernatural parts of the Bible?
So one thing that I would say to them is that when we're talking about these things that we're categorizing as separate from demons, we're not talking about what is the origin of the phenomenon. What we're doing is we're categorizing the phenomenon. So we're saying that these things manifest themselves as something separate than the demonic. And so these are spiritual realities that may even have material forms, like with giants and witches and werewolves and all of those things. However, they are a spiritual reality, and they manifest as different than what we typically see in the demonic. So for us to be cataloging these things, we have to consider them a separate phenomenon, even if they have the same source. And so, I wouldn't be opposed to saying that the source for these things is demonic in origin, and that this is some sort of a trick, or like some sort of enchantment that a demon is using to manifest this phenomenon to you. But if we're going to approach it scientifically, we'll have to say, okay, this is a separate type of phenomenon than what we experience with demonic activity. And so we have to categorize it as such. Paul talks about elemental spirits, and maybe there's room in that category for these things. The Israelites in Deuteronomy 32 were condemned for offering sacrifices to the Shadim, which some people will render as like, territorial spirits. The King James renders it as demons, but we know it's a category kind of in between there. And so whatever fluidity that has, we might be talking about the same phenomenon, just using different terminology. And so I think it's important for a Christian who affirms the supernatural world and affirms the Word of God and affirms the scientific method by which we come to understand the world around us, that we approach these things with some humility, that even if we're talking about something and we're like, man, that's crazy, like I can't believe that's even a thing, we still have to categorize it and then maybe put a question mark by it, like maybe this didn't happen, maybe it was an acid trip, maybe it's schizophrenia, but you don't know. You don't just write stuff off, because then you're going to lose evidence that might need to be tied in later to something else.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I also want to say that I do appreciate clergy people who were writing and witnessing stories like this. And of course, Robert Kirk, the Reverend, he wasn't the only one. We have more priests, monks, and pastors throughout the church history who will be reporting supernatural, paranormal events that were happening to them, to their to the other clergy, to the saints, to the martyrs, or even to their churchgoers. And we're like, this is happening. They will give so many details. They will give names. They will give times, dates. They will describe entities. And it's like, it's easy to mock. I used to be one of those. Even as a religious person, I would brush it off all as garbage, or I don't know. And even though I still don't know, there's so many stories throughout the continents, the history of the humankind and the history of the church, that the easiest thing in the world is just to brush it off and say it's all superstition and fairy tale, even though I want to believe in the supernatural stuff of the Bible. But I'm like, but God didn't change in this universe. This cosmos, this universe didn't change either. It's nothing less spiritual or supernatural than it was before. And there's so many things God didn't explain. And it gives him pleasure for us to go and explore and understand these things. And I think it's marvelous. And on the other side, we have to be guarded, of course, when it comes to all these stories and eyewitness reports. But yeah, like I said, tonight we'll be dealing with some of the stories. We certainly cannot cover everything. I would recommend people getting the book if they want to. There are different authors who have published the book. This version I found online has so many errors in spelling. You can, for example, see here they had problem with S here as well. So I found a different translation, a different source, because not every of these scanned documents and sources, even though they're publicly available and free, none of them are done well. So what I'm going to do is share another file I found, and hopefully that will be a good one, and then we can start reading stories. Okay, are you able to see an essay?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'll go first. I skipped the intro because there's no need for us to read, and it's also linked to one. And you guys will have to, again, bear with us, especially with me as a foreigner, because this is Baroque English from 1600s, 17th century, with many words I don't even know what they would mean. So Reverend Kirk says, of the nature and actions of the subterranean, and for the most part invisible people, heretofore going under the names of elves, Fauns, and Fairies, or the like, among the Low Country Scots, and term whatever these are with their own native language, and among the Chamontines or Scottish Irish, as they are described by those who have the second sight, and now to occasion further inquiry, collected and compared. So basically, this is the beginning, before he starts telling of these stories, how they're familiar between the Scottish Irish folks. With an account of the Irish charms being part of a larger discourse of the ancient customs of the Scottish Irish, their nature, habit, manner of war, husbandry, the air and productions of their country, etc. So this is the first chapter and the first story of the first chapter, and I'll go with this one. And he named it Of the Subterranean Inhabitants. These, I will say sites or sits, but I think it's sites, or fairies they call sluach meithe, or the good people, are said to be of a middle nature between man and angel, as were demons thought to be of old, of intelligent, studious spirits and light, changeable bodies, like those called astral, somewhat of the nature of a condensed cloud, and best seen in twilight. These bodies are so pliable through the subtlety of the spirits that agitate them, that they can make them appear or disappear at pleasure. Some have bodies or vehicles, spongious, thin, and whatever that word is, that they are fed by only sucking into some fine spirituous liquor that pierces like pure air and oil. Others feed more gross on the foison or substance of corns and liquors, or on corn itself that grows on the surface of the earth, which these fairies steal away, partly invisible, partly preying on the grain, as do crows and mice. Wherefore, in this same age, they are sometimes heard to bake bread, strike hammers, and to do such like services within the little hillocks where they most hunt, some whereof of old, before the gospel dispelled paganism, and in some barbarous places as yet, enter houses after all are at rest, and set the kitchens in order, cleansing all the vessels. Such drudges go under the name of brownies. When we have plenty, they have scarcity at their homes, and on the contrary, for they have not empowered to catch as much prey everywhere as they please. Their robberies notwithstanding, they oftentimes occasion great ricks of corn, not to bleed so well, as they call it, or prove so copious by very far as they expected by the owner. This is very challenging for me because, again, we're talking about 1600s English. Their bodies of I don't know what is this, congealed air are sometimes carried aloft, otherwise grovel in different shapes and enter in any cranny or cleft of the earth where air enters to their ordinary dwellings, the earth being full of cavities and cells, and there being no place or creature but is supposed to have other animals, greater or lesser, living in or upon it as inhabitants, and no such thing as a pure wilderness in the whole universe. So that's the first account, and I'll stop here. Shaun, okay, I'll have to stop sharing, I guess, or go back like this, so then it won't be zoomed in so much. Shaun, so when it comes to the first story, even though it's not, we don't know everything yet, but here we see that Reverend Kirk was speaking about these underground spiritual beings that were spreading, especially before the gospel came, and that they were familiar not just by being spiritual beings, but also, eating real food, just like humans would. So this is why Reverend Kirk would call them that there will be a mixture between angels and people. So far, when we read just the first account, the first story, what is your imagination? How would you imagine these beings to be?
I would imagine that. Okay, so if I were to say that the people were mistaking a phenomenon, I would say that in the early morning of the hours, when you see the mist rising above the ground, that they would probably assume this is those entities rising from the subterranean caverns. But these people weren't stupid, and they lived in the land, and so they would understand that these things, whatever they're seeing, whatever is preternatural, is not the same thing as what happens every single day. And so I think it's kind of easy for someone to say, oh yeah, they saw mist on the ground, they assume this cloud-like vaporous creature comes out of the ground. But like I said, they lived there every day. They knew what was natural from what wasn't natural. And so to say, hey, yeah, it's something like that, but it has its own like ethereal body, and it moves, and then it goes back into the ground. And when we have plenty on this side of the ground, they have little. And it's almost, it sounds kind of stupid, but it's almost like a tug of war of the crops. If they're growing up high here, there's not much down below, which may be kind of stupid to, but maybe that's the way that they were thinking of it. If it grows really well up here, it's not growing well down there. And so they come up and they afflict our crops in order to nourish themselves and then rob people. I'm reminded, I mean, and of course it's appropriate that the Scots and the Irish are talking about the Fae, because this sounds very much like the Tuatha De Danann, the gods of the Irish that live in the mountains. But I'm also reminded of the stories that we covered from the Solomon Islands of the creatures dwelling in subterranean areas. And really, like almost every culture that I know has an understanding that there are things that dwell underneath the earth that have some conversation with man. And so although we could say, well, this is pagan superstition, it almost appears to be pan-cultural. Like every human has this experience that there's something in the ground that when it rises from the ground has interactions with people. And so I think that they're definitely talking about a specific context for the Irish and Scottish, but without knowing it, they're actually describing a phenomenon that happens worldwide.
Yeah, thanks for that. And again, I kept thinking about them mentioning hammers and them mentioning the gospel comings. It was like, this is in the times when gospel was not so well spread. And I'm thinking, well, could there be a connection? And my spiritual side of me would think, well, there must be connection. If the gospel is coming and overtaking the land, and many people are converting, and there's less paganism, well, then would these entities with so much prevalent and present? Maybe not, because then the power of gospel would repel them if they're not on the side of God, if they're not serving him, if they're rebellious on the other side, and if they're serving someone else, then, well, yeah, of course the power of the gospel and the truth of the gospel would repel them. So I'm curious to read more stories to see if we have it, instances of something like that when people would pray or maybe read the Bible, if these entities would maybe back off. So yeah, I shared the second story. Whenever you want to go with it, I'm cool.
We then, the more terrestrial kind, having now so numerously planted all countries, do labor for that abstruse people as well as for ourselves, albeit when several countries were uninhabited by us, these had their easy tillage above ground, as we now, the print of whose furrows do yet remain to be seen on the shoulders of the very high hills, which was done when the Champagne ground was wood and forest. They removed to other lodgings at the beginning of each quarter of the year, so traveling till doomsday, being patient of staying in one place and finding some ease by
impatient.
Do what?
Yeah, they're impatient.
Oh, being impatient of staying in one place and finding some ease by sojourning and changing habitations. Their chameleon-like bodies swim in the air, near the earth, with bag and baggage, and at such revolution of time, seers of men of the second sight, females being but seldom so qualified, have very terrifying encounters with them, even on highways, who therefore usually shun to travel abroad at these 4 seasons of the year, and thereby have made it a custom to this day among the Scottish Irish to keep church duly every first Sunday of the quarter, to seine or hollow themselves their corns and cattle from the shots and stealth of these wandering tribes, and many of these superstitious people will not be seen in church again till the next quarter begin, as if no duty were to be learned or done by them, but all the use of worship and sermons were to save them from those arrows that fly in the dark. They are distributed in tribes and orders, have children, nurses, marriages, deaths, and burials in appearance, even as we, unless they so for a mock show or to prognosticate some such things to be among us.
Wow, that's wild. So I'll go first because you've read, so we can always do that. Like if I read, you can go first comment to help each other's throats. So for a few things went through my mind while you're reading this. So some church folks would come to church not only because they want to hear the gospel and praise God and just have joined the assembly of the saints, but they will be like coming here especially from certain times for protection against these entities, and they will disappear as they will be attacked if they want to come to the church. Second thing is that these fairies or and other spiritual entities, even though they'll be living underground, but they'll be changing their locations, and they'll have their almost like their sky bodies, quote unquote. While they were living underground, I was like, okay, this is where we're getting stories of dwarfs, of hobbits, something like this. But none of them have invisible bodies and can fly. So obviously here we're talking about entities. They can shapeshift and change their bodies and even habitat at will. And why would they move? Well, it's not just because they may be lacking food. What if Christians are coming there and taking the land for God and by doing that and serving God, the land is becoming sacred. So if the land is sacred and under the dominion of the people of God, then these forces of darkness, even though they would portray themselves to be light and entities of light, they cannot deal with it. They'll have to flee somewhere else, just like a person who is possessed by a demon. The demon has to flee somewhere where the demon would feel it's not threatened by the people of God and by the Holy Spirit living in us. But also, let me see here, you read something that was, people who have second sight, seers. So these are Christians who have this ability, who have this gift, and we see them, we read about them in the Old Testament especially. They're able to see entities like them. And this is not good, because whenever you can see like a spiritual entity that is of evil nature, you're exposing them. You see how they look like, you see where they're moving, where they're dwelling. You can try to expose them and explain to other people, describe them, just the same way if you would be, I don't know, witnessing a crime scene and telling to the police officer. It's not in the interest of the criminal for everyone to know how they look like. So I was just that also hit me. Also, these chameleon-like bodies swim, quote unquote, in the air, and yeah, they're traveling just like you mentioned earlier, like these elemental spirits. These will not be principalities and powers. This would be something lower than that. I don't know in which category we can even put these species. But it's so interesting. The more revelation we're giving about these entities, even though they can look cute, I've heard over the years that there are some serious Christian religious podcasts who are exposing fairies and elves to be actually creatures of the dark, not just something nice and shiny, and they love kids. This would be just like an outside deception. Maybe you know more about this, but so far this is my impression when it comes to the second story.
Yeah, those really romanticized images of elves and fairies. Those are the Christianized versions. The old pagan versions, they were not as pretty. They had lots of they were ferocious. I mean, now the Irish would never say as much because, as we'll find later, the Irish have a custom of not speaking evil against anything that they see as dangerous. So they would call them the good people. But really, they were feared, greatly feared. It's interesting to me that they move on every quarter of the year. And if you look at the, like the old calendars, every 3 months you have the changing of the season. That's why we have the changing of the seasons now, and it correlates with the sun being at the summer and winter solstices and the spring and fall equinoxes. And man, it's super interesting to see that they move on these seasons and people would see them, and those are the same times when the pagans would celebrate. It's like that seems like it lines up really well. And as you said, they would appear as beings of light when the Christians were inhabiting the place, because they had to appear to the Christians as if they belonged within their worldview. Whereas to the pagans, they would appear as these monstrous entities because they belonged in their worldview. And interestingly, now today, in a hyper technology era, they appear as flying saucers because they are changing their appearance to fit what we'll expect within our worldview. And I think it's really interesting that the places that have the most frequency of flying saucer sightings are those that are living in a post-Christian age. So it's almost like when Christianity comes in and is strong, these things are kind of tamped down. It's like we have the Hun Moon from K-pop Demon Hunters, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
So we kind of have that set when everyone's a Christian, but when it gets weaker, then they come through and they change their appearance based on what we will expect. So yeah, I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one brief thing. When I interviewed Dr. Hugh Russ a couple of years ago, he said that the UFO and alien phenomena, at least in the United States, that's statistically is prevalent in those states there. And in those areas of the states and the country, they're obsessed with witchcraft, where there are not so many churches, there are not so many gospel-believing people, where the New Age, the occult, Ouija boards, all that garbage is prevalent. They see more UFO and alien sightings than religious sites. I'm like, that's not a coincidence. And what you're saying now perfectly matches. Like, hey, who is seeing these people? I mean, who is seeing these entities? Well, usually, not only, but usually people who are into paganism or living without God. So they're being deceived by seeing all these things many times tempting as something nice. Just like if you would give a candy or ice cream to a kid, you wouldn't give something to a kid. If you have bad thoughts, you wouldn't give them something that they'll be like, "Oh, I don't want that." The same strategies apply to adults. They will give them just as the Satan would come and deceive people by giving them something they want. Oh, you want career, or you want nice look, or you want to be popular, you want fame. Okay, well, sign the contract, so to speak, metaphorically, and I'll give you all of this. It's the story, the narrative didn't change for thousands of years. Okay, so this is story number 3. They're clearly seen by these men of the second side, so these are the Christian seers, to eat at funeral banquets. Hence, many of the Scottish Irish will not taste meat at those meetings, lest they have communion with or be poisoned by them. Oh, wow. So, are they seen to carry the bier or coffin with a corpse among the Middle Earth men to the grave? Some men of that exalted sight, whether by art or nature, have told me they have seen at those meetings a double man, or the shape of the same man in two places. That is a subterranean and subterranean inhabitant, perfectly resembling one another in all points, whom he notwithstanding could easily distinguish one from another by some secret tokens and operations. And so goes speak to the man, his neighbor and familiar, passing by the apparition of resemblance of him. They avouch that every element and different state of being have animals resembling those of another element, as there be fishes sometimes caught at sea resembling monks of late order. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. How can fish resemble monks? So resembling monks of late order in all their hoods and dresses, so as the Roman invention of good and bad demons and guardian angels particularly assigned is called by them an ignorant mistake sprung only from this original. They call this reflex man a koimimecht, whatever this word is, or co-walker. So yeah, I'll just stick with co-walker. Every way like the man, as a twin brother and companion, haunting him as his shadow, and is often seen and knowing among men, resembling the original both before and after the original is dead, and was else often seen of old to enter a house by which these people knew that a person of that likeness was to visit them within a few days. Well, this is a doppelganger. We see this in so many modern cryptid stories and haunted places and ghosts. People would witness something like this, and first they would see a person, they do like, oh, this is my cousin, my wife, my brother, my kid, and later they will see them like, hey, why did you do this, or where have you been? They're like, oh, I've been over there. They're like, oh, no, I just saw you 5 minutes ago, and they're like, no, that wasn't me. So, Shaun, you and I covered a number of these doppelganger stories, and they seem to be pretty much the same as what was happening over there. So basically this goes from culture to culture, from period to period, from era to era. People witness things, and we can put them think they're crazy and put them in a loony house, but actually they're just depicting what they saw, especially people who have this second sight, or people who are actually seers and can see in the spirit realm.
Yeah, and if I could say, we also see it in the book of Acts, where the people who were praying for Peter thought that it was his angel that came to the door, not Peter. So they had this understanding that there was something that looked like you that could appear and actually not be you. So, and of course it doesn't flush that out too much, but it just that instance in the book of Acts is interesting, because it does seem to imply that they had a category for this, that there was something that would be able to mimic your body but wasn't actually you.
Yeah, unless I'm mistaken, and there could be the differences in translations between Bible and Bible, but I think it says Peter's angel, right? Not ghost. So it's like, well, would they then think that his guardian angel was kind of looking like Peter? That's interesting. Okay, so this copy or echo or living picture goes at last to his own herd. It accompanied that person so long and frequently for ends best known to itself. whether to guard him from the secret assaults of some of its own folks, or only as a sportful ape to counterfeit all of his actions. So yeah, this is perfectly what you were referencing in the book of Acts. So if this is guardian angel, yeah, of course it will protect you. But if it's a doppelganger, if it's an evil spirit, it will work against you. But it's so funny how both God and or angels, and on the other side Satan and demons, they can mimic, they can come embodied, they can shapeshift, they can just do so many things that are impossible for us as humans. And it's so easy sometimes to put everything in one category as black and white and overgeneralize and either accept or reject anything. But many times what I notice in my spiritual life, and also covering topics for the podcast, is like many times there's this rarely mentioned middle road that's many times seems to be the best one, the most logical, the most biblical one, including in this case. Like like how can you know immediately if an entity like that is good or evil? You have to test the spirits, you have to see, you have to judge well. You can't know from the very get-go, oh, you know what, like I heard from so many Christians, in the last several years, that every ghost is necessarily a demon that is familiar spirit mimicking someone who passed away in order to deceive you. And now if you if you're, God forbid, like communicating with the spirit or with the ghost because you may be missing that person, or you notice some things in your house, it's inevitably demonic. Yes, maybe in many cases, but in every case, I doubt. But we are so easy to overgeneralize when it comes to so many of these things. However, the stories of old witches prove beyond contradiction that all sorts of spirits which assume light, airy bodies or crazed bodies coacted by foreign spirits seem to have some pleasure, at least to assuage some pain or melancholy, by frisking and capering like satyrs, or whistling and shrieking like unlucky birds in their unhallowed synagogues and Sabbaths. I'll stop here, man. This is Shaun. This is so much like when Lilith, the screeching owl, was depicted when God was talking to either I forgot, was it Isaiah or Jeremiah, when he's speaking about judgment and these places of damnation with their hyenas and jackals, and places where like it's like desert type of things, where also satyrs. So these like demonic type of entities would come and dwell there. And then Lilith is mentioned as the screeching owl and bird, the feminine type. It's like this description at least is mentioning that kind of desert like judgment place in the Bible, where God would be like, yeah, this is the place of death, this is the place where of judgment. There's no oasis, there's no water, there's not God's presence, there's no God's church, there's nothing for your spiritual or even bodily nourishment and life. So it's like this is the place where you should avoid, or you should come with the gospel and turn this spiritual desert into oasis by proclaiming the gospel. So I just find it very interesting that in the same sentence, Reverend Kirk is mentioned satyrs and these birds, just like in that same passage of the Old Testament.
Yeah, and I'm reminded of the Native American legends of raven mockers, who have that same, they make these sounds, and that's how you'll know that they're present, even if you can't see them. And so, and they seem to be evil spirits or witches, and I believe that was the context, is witches who are then assuaging their melancholy by going out and dancing and doing all the stuff that we see. C.S. Lewis portrays the creatures doing in Narnia. Having their fun and dancing and gallivanting about. But that's the context here, is that's what they're doing, and they're wicked.
Yeah, makes sense. Otherwise, being in a different state and element, they neither can nor will easily converse with them. They avouch that a hello or great eater hath a voracious elf to be his attender called whatever is this, a joint eater or a just halver, feeding on the pith and quintessence of what the man eats, and that therefore he continues lean like a hawk or heron, notwithstanding his devouring appetite. Yet it would seem they convey that substance elsewhere, for these subterraneans eat but little in their dwellings, their food being exactly clean and served up by pleasant children like enchanted puppets. What food they extract from us is conveyed to their homes by secret paths, as some skillful women do the pith or pith of milk from their neighbors' cows into their own cheese hold through a hair tether at a great distance by art, magic, or by drawing a what I don't know what is this spigot, I don't know, fasten.
Spigot. That's like the hose spigot that's on the outside of your house.
Okay. Fastened in a post, which will bring milk as far off as a bull will be heard to roar. The cheese made of the remaining milk of a cow thus strained will swim in water like cork. The method they take to recover their milk is a bitter chiding of the suspected enchanters, charging them by a counter charm to give them back their own in God or their master's name. But a little of the mother's dung stroked on the cow's mouth before it's sucked, and it does prevent this theft. So, unless I'm mistaken, the ending of this part has to deal with certain almost like magic-like or spells or at least superstitious methods that will prevent you from either losing something or being attacked by all these spirits. And we see that in at least in this third story, in this third narrative, there's so many biblical parallels. We see witches, we see satyrs which will be goat-like demons, entities. We see these screeching birds, just like Lilith again was described in the Old Testament. We see a lot of things that once when you label them and label them with biblical names and put biblical lenses on, you can see that these are not good entities. These are not the actual entities of light. So besides what you already commented, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I just think that it's interesting that there was this understanding that women had this power to be able to steal milk from somebody else's cow and then use like some sort of witchcraft or spells in order to magically transport the milk from one place to another without there being like any intricate systems of tubes or anything like that. Just it was there and it went over there, and we don't know how it happened, but however they do that, that's how these elves or these fairies move all the nutrition that they steal from our houses.
And it's also funny to me how they're putting elves and fairies in the same sentence as if they're the same entities to them. Maybe you know more than me. Were they seen as the same beings?
So the Fae were like a larger group of these like good people, and then they would segment that off and into like, you know, you had dwarves and elves and gnomes, and then you had the fairies in particular, which were a separate group of people. But the Fae referred to kind of all of this phenomenon.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Their houses are called large and fair, and unless at some odd occasions unperceivable by vulgar eyes, like Ratchland and other enchanted islands, having for light continual lamps and fires, often seen without fuel to sustain them. Women are yet alive who tell that they were taken away when in childbed to nurse fairy children, a lingering voracious image of theirs being left in their place, like the reflection in a mirror. Okay, so that's that double, that body double that we were talking about. They're taken, and then that body double is what's is left in the stead, so someone doesn't know that they were taken. Which, as if it were some insatiable spirit in an assumed body, made first semblance to devour the meat that it cunningly carried by, and then left the carcass as if it expired and departed thence by a natural and common death. The child and fire, with food and all other necessities, are set before the nurse. How soon she enters, but she neither perceives any passage out, nor sees what these people do in other rooms of the lodging. So she doesn't know what's going on there. When the child is weaned or dies, the nurse is conveyed back or gets it to her choice to stay there. But if any subterranean be so subtle as to practice sleights for procuring a privacy to any of their mysteries, such as making use of ointments, which, as Gyges' ring, makes them invisible or nimble, or casts them in a trance, or alters their shape, or makes things appear at a vast distance, etc., they smite them without pain, as with the puff of wind, and bereave them of both natural and acquired sights in the twinkling of an eye. Both these sights, where once they came being in the same organ, are inseparable, or they strike them dumb. The Tramontanes, to this day, put bread, the Bible, or a piece of iron in women's beds, that or when travailing to save them from being thus stolen. And they commonly report that all uncouth, unknown wights are terrified by nothing earthly so much as by cold iron. They deliver the reason to be that hell, lying betwixt the chill tempests and the firebrands of scalding metals and iron of the north, hence the lodestone, causes a tendency to that point by an antipathy thereto. These odious, far-scenting creatures shrug and fright at all that comes thence, relating to so abhorred a place, whence their torment is either begun or feared to come thereafter, or hereafter.
Okay. I didn't understand everything because sentences are like as long as Apostle Paul's epistles, but thankfully with Paul's epistles we have modern English translations. So I didn't understand every word and in every sentence. But what got me was this part today. Once they would put the Bible, the bread, and a piece of iron, these spiritual entities, demonic entities, they will be how we call them, whites. They'll be terrified, and they will be, especially by the cold iron, and they would leave, and they wouldn't attack or abduct these people or these children. And I'm wondering, like, okay, I understand the Bible. Bread, well, okay, if we spiritualize and go with Jesus being the bread, giving the bread to people, he's the one who is feeding us, so to speak. I'm like, iron. I'm like, okay, what is it about iron that is would make a spiritual entity being afraid of or to repel it? Are you familiar with that part of lore?
Yeah, it starts off with the idea that the weapons of the pre-Metal Age people were meteoric iron, so literally metal that came down from heaven, and that was, they didn't have to smelt that because it came in the form of pure iron. And so the most powerful weapons, they were considered the weapons of the gods, came from the heavens. And so iron was said to have these properties that would cause all of the spiritual entities to fear it. And in fact, that's the reason that we still use iron on our prison bars today, because it's thought to contain evil.
Oh wow! So it has like a double meaning.
Yeah.
Wow, I never heard that. That's so cool. I forgot which metal has these abilities. Like, for example, if you would make a doorknob out of this metal, it has the ability to kind of cleanse itself. I don't know if it's iron or something else, but some type of a metal has this ability.
Copper and silver both have that ability. They don't allow bacteria to grow in it. That's why our water pipes are made of copper, and all of our eating implements used to be made of silver.
Okay, well, maybe then for the first type of stories when iron is mentioned, but then in this type of the second type of stories where silver is mentioned, then no wonder then in so many myths, mythologies, lores and legends, these two metals are mentioned as fighting werewolves, vampires, evil spirits, because there's something that people see like common things around us that are not necessarily spiritual, that they think like, oh, maybe I can use this against the spirits or against these monsters. And once when they practice or test it, if it works, they write it down and pass from generation to generation. There's something about it. I don't know.
Well, that's just like salt preserves and cleanses, and then there came the idea that salt would protect you against ghosts and witches because it both preserves and cleanses. And so, they just take that idea and then map it onto the spiritual and say, well, if that is unclean and that is wicked, then the salt will protect from that.
Yeah, I think you and I spoke about this long ago, but very shortly when we were covering some horror stories that people post either on Reddit or in some of the books that we will be getting when authors compiles, supposedly true scary stories, true horror stories. And in some of these, people used salt. And then we were like, oh, why did they use salt? So I think you're actually commenting on this a while ago. So the fifth eyewitness story that Reverend Kirk compiled is number 5. He says, their apparel and speech is like that of the people and country under which they live. So are they seen to wear plaids and variegated, I don't know what is this, but some type of garments in the
variegated.
Variegated, thank you. In the Highlands of Scotland, and something here, therefore, in Ireland. They speak but little, and that by way of whistling, clear, not rough. The very devils conjured in any country do answer in the language of the place. Yet sometimes these subterraneans speak more distinctly than at other times. Their women are said to spin very fine, to dye, to tissue, and embroider. But whether it be as manual operation of substantial refined stuffs with apt and solid instruments, or only curious cobwebs, impalpable rainbows, and a fantastic imitation of the actions of more terrestrial mortals, since it transcended all the senses of the seer to discern whether, I leave to conjecture as I found it. So Shaun, these entities, I won't call them people because they're called people in the title of this book. I won't call them people, but these entities, these spirit beings, they're able not just to mimic and act as people twins, but they're able to actually speak their own language, which again takes me to the Bible inevitably. And at will and based on the circumstances, they can speak more or less, and based on the location, based on the I don't know, whatever would be the context, the event happening, they would communicate more or less. So it wouldn't be just telepathically, as we will cover in some other similar paranormal stories. They will actually be able to talk, so they can actually talk by using voices. It just makes me think, well, then these entities, maybe not fully and maybe not always, but at least sometimes and at least partially, they do act, and they are visible material beings. Maybe not always, maybe not necessarily, maybe not 24/7, but it seems to me otherwise they could communicate telepathically. They don't even have to produce a sound. But in this context, at least sometimes, they're communicating just like you and I are communicating now. And it's just like, are they doing that because it's easier for them, or they will be doing this because as doppelgangers, they're trying to imitate and mimic humans in many sorts? I'm reminded of this movie that I think it came out in the 90s, and it's called Mimicry or something like that, where bugs would mutate and become huge, and they would try to I forgot, this was decades ago when I saw the movie, and they would be somehow trying to look outside like humans, but inside there'll be basically bugs that will be like overgrown. We see something similar in Men in Black movies, right? I'm not saying this is true. Of course, these are sci-fi and horror movies, but I'm just, my mind goes there that entities like this, they can outside copy human beings perfectly. Which, if we will go to conspiracy theories, we will go with reptilians and lizard people. Like, hey, outwardly, except something's in their eyes, they look perfect as us, perfectly, the same. But inside, they're rotten, they're dead, or they serve someone else. So I don't know if you want to make any other parallels or give a further explanation.
Yeah, it's interesting that he says that in whatever place they're conjured, they speak that language. And so for me, it's either they have a lexicon of all languages and can speak all of them fluently, and they know where it is that they're conjured at, and so then they'll have this conversation in the language of the people who summon them, or they're not actually speaking at all. It's telepathic, like what you said, and what they're doing is they're using the lexicon that's in the brain of the person who's already summoned them, and using that to form images, and using that to speak their language, even though they themselves are not speaking at all, which to me is really interesting. And so that would be maybe one of the reasons why you'll see what it is that you expect to see.
Yeah, it also tells me that these entities are it's easy for them to adjust to the climate, to the culture, to the even when it comes to the physical realm, to the nature, to the landscape of a given place. And why? Because they've been doing this for a long time. They can adopt, they can mimic your words, the way you look. But why are they doing that? Well, because their agenda is not like with angels or with guardian angels and any entities that serve God, because they wouldn't be hiding and trying to practice magic, or try to abduct a child or a human being, or they wouldn't be able to be repelled by the gospel if they will be on God's side. So there's so much mystery about them. It's easy for me or for any of us to say, this is they're all demons. Okay, but that doesn't solve anything. Like, there's something about us, especially me, like, I'm curious, like, I want to learn more. Like, what type of beings would they be actually? What would be their agenda, except, like, deceiving people, attacking them, serving Satan, whatever. But something like more specific, it's very hard to tell, especially if only source of information we have few passages in the Bible, and primarily testimonies in different cultures and lore. Like, and especially from generation to generation, lore gets bigger and more complex as people add stories and details to the same stories hundreds of years later. So this is very hard to, like, discern, like, how they look like, where do they live, where do they hide, are they still prevalent today, how do people call them today, because not many people use the word fairy or fairies, at least if we would not mention stories we tell to our kids. So I'm just like, I'm just, my mind is so curious. And it's like, what if these are the entities, like you were mentioning UFOs and aliens? What if these are part of those fallen army of spiritual entities, that they're the same things but just change names and in appearance from culture to culture, and from eon to eon, from era to era, from period to period. And maybe they can look like maybe they can look like green tea, but in 100 years they can look like water. But they're just, they're liquids. They're still liquid. They can only shape shift outside and try to be more pleasurable, like, oh, like green tea now tastes better than just water. I'm just trying to graphically describe, like, how they can manipulate and deceive people. So my mind is going, like, this area is not very explored, not even in biblical studies. I wouldn't even go there, like in churches and academia. This would be considered as ridiculous. But even among Christian, cryptid researchers, serious cryptid researchers, I know that there are some episodes, but not too many and not too serious. My question to you is, have you heard in the past some Christian cryptid channel dissecting this topic, but seriously, not through conspiracies, but through, like, some really good sources?
Yeah, there's a few that do. It's not It's not common at all. To throw a wrench in things, one of the really interesting things here is we know that alien activity, especially like alien abductions, they tend to respond to the name of Jesus, right? If you name the name of Jesus, it tends to stop the phenomenon. But there are also cases where it doesn't. Poltergeist activity is categorized, was originally categorized by the church as a phenomenon that doesn't respond to religious provocation and doesn't respond to exorcism. It's not under that influence. It's not under that power. This is something different. Elves and fairies traditionally are not said to be responsive to religious provocation. They don't respond to holy water. They don't respond to prayers. So these are a separate category. That doesn't mean that, to them, Christ isn't Lord, but it means that they are not part, or at least theoretically, they would not be part of the defeated enemy. Which makes me think that maybe we're dealing with something that was, kind of a Tom Bombadil kind of thing, where these were the original caretakers of the earth that were designed to be subordinate to man, that man would rule and they would be the ones taking care of things. And they didn't necessarily fall. They've kept their estate. But because we fell, they now see us as the enemy who plunged all of creation into this hopelessness. And so they have a righteous anger towards us.
Man, that's a good theory and very interesting one. Reminds me, several months ago we were talking about the Phantoms of the Night in the European medieval folk. We covered the whole book in 2 episodes. It took us like 4 or 5 hours. And we were talking as this being a potential, maybe even the best explanation, how come some spirits that will be like seemingly ruling over certain forests and greenery and nature and landscapes in Europe, they wouldn't be attacking people. Their job would be simply to protect against anyone who would be abusing nature. So that reminds me of what you were saying. Yet I can't help myself but not to go back to the screeching owl, the screeching bird, satyrs, also these entities, to act as doppelgangers, and also incantations and spells being included. And I'm like, it's like we don't know. It's like, if these are neutral entities, why would these almost inevitably demonic things be involved? There are so many questions.
Yeah, so that's why I said, like, at the start, what we're trying to do is categorize the phenomena. So then we just have to theorize about what the origin is. If the phenomena responds to the name of Christ and stops, then we can say that this portion of this phenomena had a demonic origin. And if it doesn't, then we can say it didn't have a demonic origin. Just like, you have people who have interactions with Bigfoot or Yeti or the giants of Solomon Islands, right? And most of the time, the interactions are uneventful or they're peaceful. But there are times where they attack. Well, if it was one of the guardian spirits, it maybe wouldn't be so aggressive. But if it's a demon who is mocking or copying this phenomenon, then it would attack. So it's possible that what you're looking at is a phenomenon that has 2 sources, and you kind of have to parse out which is the origin. And that's why you test the spirits, because just like you could receive a message from an angel, and the Bible tells us to test the spirits. Well, that same phenomenon is said to be able to be copied by demons. And so that's the reason that you have to test the spirits, because they can mimic the phenomenon.
Yeah, also reminds me of some of the false prophets, especially in the Old Testament, who give a glimpse of truth, and everything else is vague and false. It's like that's how, in the same fashion, Satan and false and fallen spirits, they operate. They will give you a little bit of truth, and everything else is masqueraded with all these false details, and of course promising you all these so-called blessings and gifts that will if you were looking honestly, they would only make you more and more separated from God, not closer. All of these so-called gifts and blessings to become richer, to become more famous, to become whatever, faster, better, smarter than others. All of these things are very egoistic and self-centered that will make you distant from God and from others. In that case, you don't really love your neighbor as yourself. So I'm just thinking like there's something also to that. Okay, you want to continue with story number 6, please?
Yes. Their men travel much abroad, either presaging or aping the dismal and tragical actions of some amongst us, and have also many disastrous doings of their own. As convocations, fightings, gashes, wounds, and burials, both in the earth and air, they live much longer than we, yet die at last, or least vanish from that state. For 'tis one of their tenets that nothing perisheth, but as the sun and year, everything goes in a circle, lesser or greater, and is renewed and refreshed in its revolutions, as 'tis another that every body in the creation moves, which is a sort of life, and that nothing moves but has another animal moving on it, and so on, to the uttermost minute, to the utmost minute, uh, to the utmost minutest corpuscle that's capable to be a receptacle of life.
I'll give you a medal for reading that. I will stop 20 times. So wait. Does it say? Because look, this sentence is from here. If people can see my white mouse, that kind of hand from day to here. Look, that's like this whole screen is one sentence. No wonder we have trouble. Plus, it's 1600s English. No wonder sometimes we have trouble reading. So, Shaun, did you understand that they kind of believe that even though these spirits would live long, just like elves, and die eventually, it's almost like no big deal because it's some sort of a reincarnation of the new life and new birth coming for them.
Yeah, that's what it seems to. At least it's saying that that's what the author believes that they believe, is that everything recycles itself, and so even though they will eventually die, that everything then is comes back around. Which, if you look at nature, that's kind of the way God made nature to be.
Well, your chapter is very short. I don't even know if there's anything else to discuss. So let's move forward for the sake of time. They're said to have aristocratical rulers and laws, but no discernible religion, love, or devotion towards God, the blessed maker of all. Well, that's kind of a little bit problematic. No discernible religion or love, devotion towards God. They disappear whenever they hear his name invoked or the name of Jesus, at which all do bow willingly or by constraint that dwell above or beneath within the earth, Philippians 2:10, nor can they act aught at that time after hearing of that sacred name. Okay, so thank you so much for that clarification. I wish he brought this at the beginning because we were just discussing about this a while ago. So they don't necessarily love God, but when they hear about Jesus, they have to bow, not necessarily unwillingly. Maybe some of them willingly, maybe some of them unwillingly. But it also doesn't seem like they're too happy when they hear Jesus' name, which just brings me more to the theory that they're more malicious than of good nature. But also, again, I cannot overgeneralize.
Yeah, and there's lots of stories coming out of Northern Europe that show interactions with these like elves and stuff, where they're like, yeah, those creatures, the elves and stuff, they don't respond at all to the name of Jesus. Like they just move on when you plant a church because they're like, we don't have any more power here, but they don't respond to the name of Jesus like a demon does.
But see, even if they're neutral and they're not fallen, it's like now I have more questions. Like, wouldn't they be smiling and say, "Hey, good job, you're serving Jesus, and we know Jesus, we serve him too," or at least like, "Oh yeah, you serve the name of all names, we bow to him too. Yeah, just carry on, and we'll leave you this location to yourself." It's like, how can they be neutral to Christ, who is Alpha and Omega? It's like that's impossible for you to hear the name above all names and like, it's not like I heard the name of like this Arizona green tea. I'm like, yeah, it's okay, no big deal. It's like there's no reverence. Like, how is that possible?
Well, and maybe, and again, this is just theory, but maybe, the fact that they kind of, before Christianity, in the pagan lands, obviously, they kind of ruled over man. And when Christianity came and the gospel came, man was, he retook his rightful place as having dominion over the land, spiritual and physical dominion. And so, one of the reasons that we have these beautiful cathedrals is to show our dominion that we have over nature, being able to build these great giant marvels that would bring all the people together and unite all the people. And it's created from wood and stone and glass. And so it just shows the power and the ingenuity that God has given man. But maybe when we retake that, then they're no longer needed there because we have now dominion over this area. And so they go back into the wilderness.
Mm. The Tabheiser, another early, well, not early, but Baroque time, English word, the Tabheiser or seer that corresponds with this kind of familiars can bring them with a spell to appear to himself or others when he pleases, as readily as Ender, which did those of her own kind. Okay, now he's going with the spirit of Samuel. Okay, I have to stop just after one sentence, even though I hate to, because of the sake of time. What type of seers, godly seers, religious seers, Christian seers, use a spell, quote unquote, to invoke these entities? Like, maybe we're not talking spells and curses as the people in the occult and Satanism are using. So I don't know in which context did Reverend Kirk mean when he wrote this several hundred years ago, when he says that seers can use spells to make these entities appear and disappear at will. It still seems unbiblical. I don't, even if he meant something different, like maybe he meant just an invocation or just calling them by their name, maybe even personal name, if they would reveal to people. But still, like, well, why would you want to talk to fairies and elves? Like, I don't know. Again, I'm very confused.
Yeah, the word spell, it's kind of like we have the word pray now. And when we think of pray, we think of something like religious devotion. But in the original English context, it just meant to ask a question. And the word spell just meant a recitation of words. So it now has this context of, like some sort of magical ritual. But it would have been appropriate to say that the invocations on like prayer cards that like Roman Catholics read, like the prayer to Saint Michael, that it would have been appropriate to say that would have been a spell in the old sense of the word spell, because it's a recitation of words, but not in the new modern sense where it's malicious witchcraft.
Okay, thank you so much for that context. He tells they are ever readiest to go on hurtful errands, but seldom will be the messengers of a great good to men. Wow. Yeah, so they're not like Malak angels, the messengers of God bringing you the news, or the message from God. So they'll be, but seldom will be the messengers of a great good to men. He's not terrified with their sight when he calls them, but seeing them in a surprise, as often he does, frights him extremely. That's another sign that these are most likely not the good guys. Because if I would see an angel, yes, I can be scared. But if I saw the same angel over and over again, it's like seeing your neighbor's dog for the first time. Maybe it's a big dog and you're scared, especially if the race of the dog is like, type of the dog is like, maybe scary in general. But if you see him a few times, you'll be becoming friendly, and dog gets to know you and knows your smell, your scent, and it getting more friendly. Why would you be scared? So the same thing, like we know some testimonies of people that will be afraid of angels, that would depict them as powerful warriors, huge, tall. I understand. But after a while, there's no reason for you to be afraid. You respect them, but no fear. But he would see them over and over again, and he would still be frightened and, quote unquote, it says extremely, and glad he would be quit of such, for the hideous spectacles seen among them, as the torturing of some white, earnest, ghastly staring looks, skirmishes, and the like. They do not all the harm which apparently they have power to do, nor are they perceived to be in great pain, save that they are usually silent and sullen. They are said to have many pleasant toyish books, but the operation of these pieces only appears in some paroxysms of antic corybantic jollity. I'm sorry, this is insane. As if ravished and prompted by a new spirit entering into them at that instant, lighter and merrier than their own. Other books they have of involved abstruse sense, much like the some type of style. They have nothing of the Bible save collected parcels for charms and counter charms, nor not to defend themselves withal, but to operate on other animals, for they are a people invulnerable to our weapons. And albeit werewolves and witches' true bodies are, by the union of the spirit of nature that runs through all, echoing and doubling the blow towards another, wounded at home when the astral assumed bodies are stricken elsewhere, as the strings of a second harp tuned to a unison sound, though only one be struck. Yet these people have not a second or so gross a body at all to be so pierced, but as air which, when divided, unites again. And this was like a sentence that took me like 3 minutes to read, but it's insane. So our weapons cannot hurt them, and again, they can be materialized and dematerialized at will. They don't have anything like Bible, something of religious form, especially not the one that will point them or make them to love God and serve Him. But they will have books with charms. Or if they feel pain by a blow, they're better physicians than we and quickly cure it. They're not subject to sore sickness, but dwindle and decay at a certain period, all about one age. Let me see. Oh, yeah, this is the same story. Some say their continual sadness is because of their pendular state, like those men in Luke 13:26. As uncertain what at the last revolution will become of them when they are locked up into an unchangeable condition. And if they have any frolic fits of mirth, this as the constrained grinning of a mort head, or rather as acted on a stage and moved by another, than cordially coming of themselves. I have no clue what I just read, to be honest. But other men of the second side, being illiterate and unwary in their observations, vary from these, one averring those subterranean people to be departed souls attending a while in this inferior state and clothed with bodies procured through their alms deeds in this life, to hold them that they may not be scattered nor wander and be lost in the totem of their first nothing. But if any were so impious as to have given no alms, they say when the souls of such do depart, they sleep in an unactive state till they resume their terrestrial bodies again. Others, that what the Low Country Scots call a wraith, and the Irish EUG, or death's messenger, appearing sometimes as a little rough dog, and if cross and conjured in time will be pacified by the death of any other creature instead of the sick man, is only exuvious fumes of the man approaching death, exhaled and congealed, I think, into a various likeness, and cold astral bodies agitated as wildfire with wind, and are neither souls nor counterfeiting spirits, yet not a few avouch, as is said, that surely these are a numerous people by themselves, having their own polities. which diversity of judgments may occasion several. I don't know what is this in I don't know what is this in this rehearsal after the narrowest scrutiny made about it. Shaun, can you please help us paraphrase what we just read?
Yeah, and that word is inconsonancies. So yeah, they are not all necessarily together like in harmony. So yeah, they are their own people. They do their own things. They're not like witches and werewolves, which kind of go into a trance, and then they have this second body, which even if you were to hurt it, doesn't appear to hurt that second body, but the wounds will appear on the first body, which is in a trance. These things don't seem to be that way. If you strike them, you're just going to go right through them because our weapons have no effect on them. Yeah, they don't have any religion. They are what is it, Aristotelian in their thinking, which I think would mean that they assume that all things emerge out of like the lesser. So all things that are greater are just complex, more complex forms of the lesser. Because I believe Aristotle had like the bottom up theory and Plato had the top down, which is why he had the idea of the forms. But yeah, so they don't necessarily believe in a god or any religion. They just don't like Jesus.
Can you please help me understand the first sentence? Like, are they afraid of the coming judgment?
Yes. Yeah. Some of their continual sadness is because of their pendulous state. So pendulous meaning it could go back and forth, could go either way. As uncertain what at the last revolution will become of them when they are locked up into unchangeable condition. So they're not sure what it is that their judgment is going to be because it has yet to be decided, but they know that it's coming.
Man, that's like halfway between the watchers being imprisoned in Tartarus and between demons who cannot repent and they know that their judgment is coming. This is like between them, not like either of those groups, not exactly, but kind of reminds me of something in between. They're like, well, I don't know. Did I serve God? Did I? But then again, I don't like Jesus. I'll withdraw in the name of Jesus, but I don't serve him. Well, then, but who are you? Who is your master? Or if you say, well, we have no master, we're just a species of these spiritual entities. Okay, but like, what is your role? You don't exist just out of thin air. Everyone has a purpose and role, and if you're created by God, how come you don't have any communication or like relationship with him? That's weird. And then you're afraid of the coming judgment and you don't even try to like because they're literate, they have books. How come they didn't try copy understand the Bible? Because they're also able to read, they're also able to speak, so they're very literate. So I'm like, you're scared of the coming judgment, yet you don't want to do anything about that. Is it because you can't or you don't want to? It's like, again, so many questions.
Well, and just maybe to play, Elf's advocate here. The Bible is the story of human redemption, so it may not have any relevance to their situation.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially if their role would be again to like be a guardian of this space and don't hurt anyone. So in that regard, I understand. Yet if they have no relationship with God, like to me, like, well then, like, if you're a spirit that can move, wouldn't you wanna at least be in the church during the sermon, not exposing yourself, just hiding somewhere as a spirit in the corner of the church and hear a sermon, hear about Jesus whom you are rejecting? It's like, you had thousands of years to learn about your maker and someone who's calling himself Alpha and Omega and who's like, he can do something like that and you will disappear and be judged to the lower compartments of Sheol. So I'm just thinking they're not dumb. Like, wouldn't they want to learn more? Wouldn't they want to make sure they have peace with God?
So I assume that just like the angels, there might be, elect fairies. But because Paul talks about the elect angels. So I'm assuming there would be like the elect fairies, and maybe those are the ones that aren't causing any problems. So maybe the ones who are causing problems and are going around doing all this stuff, they avoid the name of Jesus because that reminds them that there will be destruction coming for them because of what they've done. But it did say that every knee will bow to Jesus willingly or by constraint. And so maybe there are fairies that willingly, are working with people. And maybe there are fairies that willingly do stick around when the Christians come and the churches are built. But we don't know about them because they're not causing problems.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, I have 8 story for you.
All right. Their weapons are most what solid earthy bodies, nothing of iron, but much of a stone, like to yellow soft flint, shaped like a barbed arrowhead, but flung as a dart with great force. These arms, cut by art and tools it seems beyond human, have somewhat of a nature of a thunderbolt, subtly and mortally wounding the vital parts without breaking the skin, of which wounds some I have observed in beasts and felt them with my hands. They are not as infallible Benjamites hitting a hair's breadth, nor are they wholly unvanquishable, at least in appearance. The men of that second sight do not discover strange things when asked, but at fits and raptures, as if inspired with some genius at that instant, which before did lurk in or about them. Thus I have frequently spoke to one of them, who in his transport told he cut the bodies of one of these people in two with his iron weapon, and so escaped this onset, yet he saw nothing left behind of that appearingly divided body. At other times he outwrestled some of them. His neighbors often perceived this man to disappear at a certain place, and then about an hour afterwards to become visible and discover himself near a bow shot from the first place. Okay, so we have missing time, right? That sounds a lot like some sort of abduction or missing time.
But no, but this is also a human who will be like almost hunting these fairies or elves, whatever, and then able to mimic also their abilities to, from what I understood from this old English, and then they will see him now in an hour, they will see him somewhere else, as if he's almost, well, not just missing time, but also being teleported or learning some secrets of how maybe to manipulate, space and time.
Yeah, from what I understand, he was wrestling with him. And so he's wrestling with the enemy that he can't see, or I guess that the neighbor can't see. And so it looks like he's there, and then he disappears. And then an hour later, he reappears a bow shot away from where he disappeared. And so then you have this missing time because he's out there wrestling with these elves.
Okay, so this word, for me, it made me think that this is a perpetual, continuous thing, because he said his neighbors often perceive this man to disappear at a certain place. So I thought, oh, this is something that the person, if he learned these crafts, and this is a human person, then he will be able to manipulate space-time,
And maybe you're right, because there is a period there. So I don't know. Maybe I got tricked by a short sentence in this, book of 1,000-word sentences. It was in that place where he became invisible, said he, that the subterraneans did encounter and combat with him. These who are unsained or unsanctified, called Fae, and said to be that word, that is pierced or wounded with those people's weapon, which makes them do somewhat very unlike their former practice, causing a sudden altercation, yet I'm sorry, I missed a line. Causing a sudden alteration. Yeah. Yet the cause, therefore, unperceivable at present, nor have they power, either they cannot make use of their natural powers, or ask not the heavenly aid. Okay, that makes sense. To escape the blow impendent. A man of the second sight perceived a person standing by him, sound to others' view, wholly gored in blood, and he, amazed like, bid him instantly flee. The whole man laughed at his art, and warning, since there was no appearance of danger. He had scarce contracted his lips from laughing when unexpectedly his enemy leapt in at his side and stabbed him. With their weapons, they also gone or pierce cows or other animals, usually said to be elf shot, whose purest substance, if they die, these subterraneans take to live on. The aerial and ethereal parts, the most spirituous matter for prolonging life, such as aqua vitae, it moderately taken is among liquors. Okay, yeah, liqueurs, leaving the terrestrial behind. The cure of such hurts is only for a man to find out the whole with his fingers, as if the spirits flowing from a man's warm hand were an antidote sufficient against their poison darts.
I don't know why. Like, did people used to speak like this 400 years ago?
Yeah, they were pretentious back then. They had to use all the big words.
Imagine theology. Well, you don't have to imagine. Just open Thomas Aquinas. But Thomas Aquinas, with modern translation, even though he was super complex, at least sentences, once when they're translated, make your studying easier. So here we see all these, spirit beings. Call them elves, call them fairies, whatever you want to call them. They still are very crafty when it comes to combat skills. Like, I was imagining an RPG game when you can choose a race, and imagine you take an elf who'll be so good with bow and arrows. I'm like, could it be that Tolkien borrow some of the inspiration from this? But no, but seriously, it's like at least portions of the Lord of the Rings. I'm like, man, Scotland, Highlands, beautiful natures, high mountains, greenery, not so many people, not super populated, fairies, all of these things. I'm like, that would be a perfect scenery for something like the Middle Earth. And yeah, I don't know what to think about this a passage that you read, except like all these combat skills that they'll be like so skilled, not just in combating people if they would want to, but also animals. So I'm like thinking, well, would they be attacking animals for the sake of killing them to eat? Because why would they otherwise kill animals?
Yeah, because they said if the creature dies, then they take their essence for nourishment. So that's part of the reason that they inflict the elf shot.
Yeah, see, when you say essence, I would not think of meat necessarily or primarily. Like, would they feed off also on some soulish or spiritual thing of an entity? And now I'm getting too far, but that's if you would say essence, I would not think of this as being my essence. This is not my essence. This is just my shell.
Right. Yeah. Maybe they feed on like the life energy. So like as your life is draining out, they're kind of stealing it, and so that might be what they feed on.
Not scary at all. Okay. Story number 9. Let's try to cover 10 stories for tonight. So story number 9. As birds and beasts whose bodies are much used to change of the free and open air or sea storms, so those invisible people are more sagacious. I guess I never seen this word.
Yeah, that means wise.
Okay. To understand, like sages, right? To understand by the book of nature things to come than we who are pestered with the grosser dregs of all elementary mixtures and have our purer spirits choked by them. The deer scents out a man and powder, though a late invention at a great distance, a hungry hunter bred, and the raven a carrion. Their brains being long clarified by the high and subtle air will observe a very small change in a trice. Thus, a man of the second sight, seer, perceiving the operations of these forecasting invisible people among us, I'll skip this, in parentheses, told he saw a winding shroud creep up on a walking healthful person's legs till it came to the knee, and afterward it came up to the middle, then to the shoulders, and at last over the head, which was visible to no other person. And by observing the spaces of time between the several stages, he easily guessed how long the man was to live who wore the shroud, for when it approached his head, he told that such a person was ripe for the grave. Shaun, please again help me understand. Does it mean that these entities would be spiritually attacking people that only these Christian seers would be able to see? And if this entity would quote unquote mark you by putting something on your body or your spiritual body or soul that is on, most people will be blind to it except seers, then soon that's like a mark or like an omen that you're dying, but you're dying soon only because they came and mark you for death. Is that what this passage is saying?
Let's see, because I know that the winding of the shroud was the guy who had the second sight, who kind of was able to see and predict that this person, based on how high the shroud was up on their body, starting at their legs, that the person would die. And it makes it sound like it's all one at one moment, like the shroud is winding up their body. But I'm expecting that maybe, okay, well, the shroud started at their leg, and then 2 weeks later he sees it around the middle, and then 2 weeks later he sees it up to his shoulder, and then when he sees it up over his head, he's like, bro, you're gonna die. And so I'm assuming that that's what it is saying, and maybe he's saying that the person who has second sight, because it says here, forecasting the invisible people among us. So it's saying like they have this ability to see, just as these sagacious people who live under the earth also have the ability to forecast like weather and stuff like that.
And do you know what the word shroud means?
Yeah, it's a burial cloth.
Okay, so if he saw a winding shroud creep up on a walking healthful person, I thought that this would resemble a spiritual person that comes to like put a hex or a spell on you. But the seer would actually see a piece of cloth, like the Shroud of Turin, just on a person's body, but with no entity behind it. Like, which one is it?
I don't think it's very clear here, but to me, it would be almost like if you saw somebody walking around and you happened to perceive that they were knee deep in a body bag, and then every time you saw them after that, the body bag was like rising up over them. I think that would be like the context for today if we were to try to interpret it for today.
Yeah, I wish Reverend Kirk, well, for the first thing, well, number one, I wish he wrote shorter sentences, more clear, and also that he gave more details so we can understand like the meaning of each of these stories. Maybe he didn't want to put too much where he didn't know, so like he wouldn't assume or add or remove, because he would take these stories and these eyewitness accounts very seriously. But I wish there was like an ending, a clear ending, like, okay, well, why did you mean by this? What did you mean by that? Because obviously to him, just like in the authors of certain biblical instances and narratives, like they're like, oh yeah, Genesis 6:4, yeah, these are the divine angels of God. Like, dude, like everyone knows. Yeah, but thousands or hundreds of years later, we wouldn't know because we're separated by culture and history, so we don't know the context. So like for him, he was like, oh yeah, I understand the story, but I just wish, when he was thinking about future generations that will be reading his stories, I just wish that he wrote in a clear way and just gave more details. Like, oh yeah, this makes sense. Like, I understand the ending of the story.
Yeah, Maddie's helping us out here in the comments. He said, according to the story, the shroud just simply appeared and wound around the body. So it didn't really have anything to do with necessarily like a hex or a curse, according to the story. Now, it could have been that they just left out that detail, or it could be that they were just the person with second sight was just able to predict that this otherwise healthy person was going to be dying soon. He also comments that the beings, remember we were talking about eating the essence. He says they eat the soul, just as flesh eats flesh, spirit eats spirit. That's pretty profound. That these things are consuming I mean, it almost goes back to that saying, you are what you eat, right? But in this case, you are because you eat, or no, you eat because you are. There you are.
Okay, so basically in this narrative or this story number 9, these fairies or elves, they're not necessarily depicted as bad guys. They're just saying that by the book of nature, and because they're sagacious or wise, they can understand if someone is dying before we would see, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so but they're not causing that. They're not the one putting spell or a curse or a hex, so you would die. Okay, so that was a very needed explanation that was, at least for me, needed in this, for this story as a context. So thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Shaun.
Yeah, and now based on everything else that Kirk said in the story, I don't think that it's totally outside of the realm of possibility that the reason that somebody could die and the reason that somebody might be able to see them in this burial shroud could be because they received that elf shot or some sort of affliction from them, just based on the characteristics of how they've characterized these things. But that was left out of the story as far as what was the cause for the person's imminent demise.
Okay, I forgot to mention something like an hour ago, and I'm so glad you mentioned elf shot again. That brings me, I wanted to comment on it earlier, but I forgot. When in the previous stories, Reverend Kirk mentions some of the spiritual protections that people will have, or they'll be seeking to have against spiritual attacks, and there'll be like this so-called, elf shots and whatnot. I'm like, my mind went, but I forgot to mention to Psalm 91. It's like, this is like almost exactly, like God protect me about, and like in English you don't know, but in Hebrew the entities like the pestilence, the sickness, I forgot the exact passages, but there are a couple passages that actually in the original in Hebrew they're talking about pagan deities. So like during the nighttime, protect me from these demon that is actually a real spiritual entity in the pagan world. It's a god of this and that. And in another verse, God during the day protect me from these arrows, which again in Hebrew would portray another pagan deity. So here I'm like, well, what could be elf shots if they're repelled in the name of Jesus and they don't serve God? Well, their shots, so-called shots, the invisible arrows, they wouldn't bring me good if they're pointed against me or you as people. What are they except those spiritual weaponry that, again, we would pray like in Psalm 91, God protect me against, all these arrows of the enemies. They can be physical, they can be material, but many times they're spiritual and not seen by us unless we're seers. So I wanted to mention this like an hour ago when we were talking about this, but I forgot because we were talking about so many things left and right. But I'm so glad and thankful that you mentioned again elf shots, because I'm like, Psalm 91. Psalm 91 was found even among the copies, unless I'm mistaken, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, as those Essenes and the early communities of believers. They held it so precious because they're like, hey, this was for them. One of those passages of the Bible that they would quote and study for protection against the evil attacks. I'm like, yes, Psalm 91 is very important.
Yeah, and if we go on and get a little kookier, even then, just like the pagan, deities and stuff. When Paul talks about the fiery darts of the enemy, that the shield of the spirit or the shield of faith will protect you against. Maybe there is a literal component to that. Maybe it's not just metaphor for for sin, but maybe there is a literal component that the shield of faith will protect you from that.
I mean, who knows? This brings some type of context to the biblical passages, and I'm not saying this is true, but I'm saying through the spiritual eyes of seers. And I had interviewed Doug Overmeyer a couple of times when we went through his book about seers, collected stories from his website and his personal ministry that went back a couple of decades ago till this day, where he interviewed so many Christian seers who see things and they think they'll be crazy. And they would explain to him, he says, my daughter used to see all of these things, just you guys. You're not crazy. There's just like not so many people you can talk to about these things, including your pastor, because they'll look at you crazy. Because you and I, Shaun, can both now look, for example, in my bookshelf, there's nothing. But maybe someone with spiritual side can see something that you and I can't, and we would think, well, you're insane. Well, actually, they're gifted. So that's my point. What if these seers can actually see how the spiritual, not just armor, but weaponry look like? Because I remember Doug telling me seers actually seeing that sometimes from people or even from demonic infestation and people living in those areas, based on what you're saying, based on how you communicate to others, there can be different color of energy leaving your body and going to the air. Which part of which other location I wouldn't know, but like if you would be like talking bad maybe about someone, intentionally gossiping evil, saying evil stuff for the sake of like maybe bringing evil to that person, like there'll be a different color of energy leaving your body based on if you will be maybe saying something that is deep and profound and a blessing. And like, how will we know these things? That doesn't say in the Bible. I'm like,
the power of life and death is in the tongue.
No, I know, but I mean, when it comes to colors, like, there's nothing like that. Like, how can I believe? How do I know? I can just listen to people who think or they actually can see something, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's true, maybe it's not, and maybe it can help me with understanding the Bible. Well, the same thing with the so-called elf shots. What if the elf shots can materialize, hurt an animal or a deer if they're going to eat it, but also in the spiritual way attack people and bring depression, bring suicidal thoughts, bring hatred? I mean, just look of the recent political assassination.
Yep.
You had to be demonically oppressed and instilled with such a hatred to do that to an innocent person. I'm not going political. I'm just saying these so-called elf shots could be so many things that we're seeing, hitting, deceiving, and oppressing people nowadays.
Yeah, and if I'm right, it's I remember in the section I read, it said that it would produce alterations in the person, that maybe they're acting in a way that they wouldn't normally act. It's interesting. Okay, so you want me to read section 10?
Yes, please.
There be many places called fairy hills, which the mountain people think impious and dangerous to peel or discover by taking earth or wood from them, superstitiously believing the souls of their predecessors to dwell there. And for that end, say they, a moat or mount was dedicate beside every churchyard to receive the souls till their adjacent bodies arise, and so become as a fairy hill, they using bodies of air when called abroad. They also affirm those creatures that move invisibly in a house and cast huge great stones, but do not much hurt, because counterwrought by some more courteous and charitable spirits that are everywhere to defend men. Well, I like that. To be souls that have not attained their rest through a vehement desire of revealing a murder or notable injury done or received, or a treasure that was forgot in their lifetime on earth, which, when disclosed to a conjurer alone, the ghost quite removes. In the next country to that of my former residence, about the year of 1676, when there was some scarcity of grain, a marvelous elapse and vision strongly struck the imagination of two women in one night, living at a good distance from one another, about a treasure hid in a hill called Fairy Hill. The appearance of a treasure was first represented to the fancy, and then an audible voice named the place where it was to their awaking senses, whereupon both arose, and meeting accidentally at the place, discovered their design, and jointly digging found a vessel as large as a Scottish peck, full of small pieces of good money, of ancient coin, which having betwixt them, they sold in dishfuls for dishfuls of meal to the country people. Very many of undoubted credit saw and had of the coin to this day, but whether it was a good or bad angel, one of the subterranean people, or the restless soul of him who hid it that discovered it, and to what end it was done, I leave to the examination of others.
Man, like, there's so much when it comes to the spiritual warfare that we are clueless. And there could be right now as we're speaking, and I hope I'm not going too much crazy. There could be these different spirits wrestling and fighting each other by using elf shots or by wrestling or by trying to hurt each other, chasing each other, even through the material, people cover, not just in churches, but even on podcasts like ours. I'm not putting too much emphasis on this channel or this episode. This is just but a small thing. I would hope in a kingdom of God. I would think and hope we are doing God's work in a very imperfect way. So I'm not even putting emphasis on this podcast or on this time, but I'm saying how much of the spiritual warfare can be happening out there when it comes to the invisible realm, where the message can be sometimes clicked coincidental even by people of different religions or even atheism, people all sorts of walk in life, and they just bump into an episode or material like this, and based on what they hear, like, and voices they will be hearing from this or this side that will tell them, oh, listen more, what about Jesus? Hey, maybe this is true. Or the other voices, oh, this is all garbage, it's religious propaganda, just turn it off. It's like, we don't know, but I believe this is very real. Like, and here we can see some glimpses of that, like, oh, like, they're good and bad spirits, like good angels and let's call them bad spirits, demonic entities. They're like fighting for people to protect them or to hurt them. And again, I just keep thinking about these self shots. Well, then what will be the good guys, the angels, or the spirits that are not necessarily angelic, but are still obeying God, still serving Him, and being faithful to Jesus? What type of weaponry and spiritual, weapons they're using to combat and protect people? I have no clue. But I'm just saying how we're oblivious. We don't know what is happening while we are like living, sleeping, eating, working. We're doing podcasts. What is happening? In another dimension that is overlapping our dimension, and they're like we're inevitably part of. It just brings so many imaginary scenes of movies like the 13 Warrior or like the Lord of the Rings and things of that sort. It's like, but what is our part? What is our goal? What is our purpose? To proclaim the good news, and whatever we do on the channel, to analyze and compare with the scriptures, and to give God the glory, so that one day when we stand before the name of all names, Alpha and Omega, Jesus Christ, we don't have to be ashamed. We won't come with our perfect lives, but we will like, Jesus, we served you, we love you. Here we are. We don't have to bow down based on fear or based on like because you're so powerful and we're trembling. No, we love you, and with all our imperfections, we come and willingly and gladly, full of joy because of your presence, we bow our knees before you because you're our Lord and Savior. This is what I'm perceiving, and this is where my mind is going when I'm combining both fiction, spiritual warfare, and that last day, because like we said, we don't have to be afraid of the name of Jesus, we who serve Him. But I hope for the souls of those who may be listening to this podcast live or tomorrow and days to come, if you didn't make peace with Jesus, please do. Not because of us, again, this is just but a humble podcast, but if we can participate in someone's conversion and coming to God, praise God. This is why this podcast exists. Shaun, what are your thoughts on this? And also, I want to say that by reading the beginning of story number 11, I'm tempted to read because it talks about vice and sin. But let me first hear your opinion on this account number 10.
Yeah. So it's talking about the ability for spirits to influence people, and them, like the ability of to communicate like where a buried treasure is, and then it gives a story of two women who both received this call, this vision to go out and unearth this treasure. And then it's talking about the people who would be able to vouch for that, and they didn't know whether it was a good spirit or an evil spirit, or whether it was a restless spirit that encouraged them to go do this. But they have this experience, and that experience is something it's relevant. I mean, it's not something you should just dismiss, because you have the evidence, you have the testimonies. This is written at a time where books were expensive, so they're not just going to be producing tabloid kind of stuff. Plus, I mean, look at the sentences that this guy's using. It's definitely work to put this together. So it wouldn't be something that he would put together if he thought that it wasn't worthwhile. So at least we can say he believes it.
Yeah, it's very short. Let me please read chapter number 11, or the 11th account of the story. It's super important, and we'll be doing the concluding part. These subterraneans have controversies, doubts, disputes, feuds, and siding of parties, there being some ignorance in all creatures and the vastest created intelligences not compassing all things. As to vice and sin, whatever their own laws be, sure according to ours, and equity natural, civil, and revealed, they transgress and commit acts of injustice and sin by what is above said as to their stealing of nurses to their children, and that other sort of plagiarism in catching our children away, may seem to heir some estate in those invisible dominions which never return. For the incontinence of their succubi spirits, who trust with men, I will guess this means sleep with men, it is abominable. But for swearing and in intemperance, they're not observed so subject to those irregularities as to envy, spite, hypocrisy, lying, and dissimulation. I'm so glad I was reading this, because wow, they are not just stealing people away and you never see them again. They're also sleeping with men, and they're considered to be succubi, so these sexual demons that will be well known in so many other religions and lores and mythologies of so many countries. So, Shaun, these are not your nice little bright winged creatures that you may think of when you watch Disney movies, like with Peter Pan and stuff like that. That we were growing up and like, yeah, these are cute. I want to have like a plush, toy of a certain elf, or well, not elf, a fairy. No, we can see here that they're not just stealing people. And you were mentioning alien abductions from at the beginning of the podcast, but they're even able to have sexual intercourse with people. And my question is, and I'm inevitably going to Genesis 6, well, could there be a product or that will be a hybrid between two different species? And if there could be, well, then what would be the name of this hybrid? And I'll leave you to comment on this.
Yeah, so I don't know necessarily if this is the right way to think about it, but when you mix a lion and a tiger, you can get a liger, and I believe that is a male lion and a female tiger. Or if you have a male tiger and a female lion, you get a tigon. And so they're two different types of mixtures, right? And they have two different traits. And it depends on the lineage. Now we know that the Nephilim came from male spirits and female humans. What happens when you have female spirits and male humans? So with the male spirits and the female humans, you have these monstrous entities. Maybe in the male humans and female spirits, you have entities that are monstrous in their character, but look exactly like humans. And maybe that's where we get the story of like the changelings, which are the idea that they would come and steal a baby away and replace it with a baby, but it's one of theirs. And then it grows up and becomes this wicked, terrible person. Yeah, that's just some of my thoughts on that.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. I didn't see because of being in front of the ebook. I didn't see any comments, so thank you for all the comments. I see Roland, I see your mom, Lisa, I see our friend from Ecuador, Del Misterio, I see Matty. Hey guys, sorry I couldn't see any comments or even respond because I had to share the screen, so the PDF had to be open. But yeah, thank you for all being with us. Thank you for commenting. I hope this supposed collection of true stories by the Reverend Kirk from a few centuries ago brought you some of the spiritual clarification, some of your spiritual life or prayers may be enhanced or changed. Maybe your spiritual guard is now enhanced and put up above, especially as we are living in wild times. And maybe now, if you're talking or planning to talk about fairies as fairy tales to your kids, if you know the background, maybe you can switch to some other type of fairy tales for them. And by knowing the background that these entities are not necessarily your good guys, even though they can be depicted in a very cute way by Disney and other movie producing companies. This Sunday we're having a very special episode. It will be probably a little bit early because of the time difference with based on this, my guest who is a scholar where he lives. So Dr. Mark Chavalas is coming back. So I'll probably meet him 5:30 p.m. Central Time. We'll be having a little bit of a controversial topic for some. For me, it's not. We'll cover 2 or 3 books from my end, and from him, he'll speak from the Mesopotamian context of the creation and 7 days. How old is the earth? Does the Bible even speak about that? What about the first 2 verses of Genesis 1 that come before day 1? We'll see how Mesopotamians used to think, which were like Israel's neighbors, because they, in many ancient things, they did not think that much differently. Their cosmology was very much similar. So we'll be covering that topic next Friday. Scholar Dr. Doug Petrovich is coming. We'll be talking about Nimrod. Following Sunday, I'm having one of the scholars that work with Dr. Hura. So we'll be talking about the odds and possibilities and the chances of Earth being being our home for humans. How many laws of physics and how many fine-tuning elements had to be put in perfect order for humans, for human life, not just to exist but also to flourish. So this episode for this Sunday will be more of the ancient one. The following Sunday will be more modern cosmology, science. And in the meantime, Dr. Petrovich is coming, like I said, next Friday. We'll be talking about Nimrod. So we'll be trying to put to go around all these false ideas and false theories about who Nimrod could be, and attack that topic through more scholarly and academic way. So there's so many good topics and good guests coming, not because of me but because of others. I don't think I do any special role here except trying to find guests, compile material, write outlines, buy books and things of that sort. So please subscribe, share. Everything we do is completely free, but it blesses me if this material changes your life, or it's a blessing to you or your community, your family, your church, your pastor. If it ever happens that you come to Christ because of us, please write it down or comment. It will bless our souls so much. And please know that you're welcome here, regardless of your origin, your background, your nationality, your skin color, your gender. I hope I don't even have to say that, because since the beginning of this podcast, I've been saying that as long as you act normal and you're kind to everyone, despite of our differences, you're more than welcome on the channel. And yeah, please share this. Please share the news about the channel with everyone else. Subscribe if you haven't. And yeah, Shaun, thank you so much for being this couple of hours with us. And yeah, everyone, I'll see you this Sunday. May God bless you. Be encouraged. We are living in dark times, but sometimes, or many times, when the seed dies and there's grieving, but that seed that dies, it brings so much fruit. We saw 2,000 years ago, and we're seeing now. So be encouraged. These are difficult, dark times, but God is still sovereign and sitting on the throne, knowing what's happening. and knowing everything from beginning to the end. May that encourage you and bless you.